Yep.
Hi, everybody. My name is Flora. Welcome to By The Book. It's an interactive webinar brought to you by our co-hosts, cousins Peter, Danny, and John Boockvar. Peter is a CNBC contributor and CIO of Bleakley Advisory Group, and John is vice chair of neurosurgery at Lenox Hill Hospital, where he's also leading clinical trials in COVID disease and working on the front lines in the COVID ICU. Danny, John's twin, is president at Duroseau, the largest acquirer of Amazon third-party private label businesses, and has 20 plus years of experience leading fast-growing consumer businesses for global brands such as the NFL and Weight Watchers. Johnny, Danny, and Peter are all leaders in their respective fields and will be answering your questions about health, wellness, finance, business, and life during this pandemic. Please do keep your questions more general than specific, as we have lots of viewers and want to make sure they all apply to the majority. With that being said, to ask our hosts any questions, please direct your attention to the chat function. It's on the bottom right of your screen where you can submit questions, and depending on the topic, John, Danny, or Peter will answer them respectively. We have some really special guests today, so Danny is going to introduce them. So take it away, Boockvars.
Super. Well, Peter, why don't you start with your elegant disclaimer, and then we'll rock and roll.
Yep, I'll start with my standard disclosure. John and Danny are not affiliated with Bleakley Advisory Group and Private Advisory Group, and nothing they say should be taken as an investment advice, and nothing I say should be taken as medical advice.
Super. I'm Danny Boockvar. Thank you, Flora, for that introduction. I'm president of Duroseau, a former CEO of Circle Line Sightseeing, and president of the NFL Experience, where I had the pleasure of doing a touchdown dance with Michael Levine, one of our special guests. Look forward to replicating that soon, probably not here. I live on the Upper West Side with my wife of 22 years and 2 teenagers, and I'll be moderating today's session. And over to you, Johnny.
Hi, guys. Thank you. I'm John Boockvar. I'm sitting here at Lenox Hill Hospital with Dr. Duroseau, who you'll meet shortly, who's in charge of our emergency room. And we're on obviously the front lines of fighting this pandemic. And I'll take a moment to just describe a little bit of the environment with Dr. Duroseau shortly. But obviously this has been a very challenging month for us. But there is a clearing in the clouds of this eyeless hurricane. And I think I like to say, for another sports analogy, that the virus had first and goal with inches into the end zone, and the healthcare providers and healthcare workers across the country had perhaps the best goal line stance in the history of humanity and held that virus out of the end zone. So it's really a pleasure to represent all the healthcare providers, the nurses, the doctors, the respiratory therapists, the environmental workers, the administrators, everyone who's here in the hospital working. There's no such thing as weekends when you're a virus, and it's just an absolute pleasure to be here and working. And frankly, we're winning right now. So we're beating back the virus, and that's frankly just good news. So Dr. Duroseau is here. Yves is head of the Lenox Hill Hospital Emergency Room Department, truly on the front of the front lines. And Yves, Dr. Duroseau, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Pleasure being here.
So Yves, obviously you and I are not only involved in treating COVID patients as they come into the emergency room, but we're both jointly involved in clinical trials here at Lenox Hill Hospital and across Northwell Health, which is the state's largest health system. Would you mind just giving us, in your opinion, sort of the trends that you've seen since we were on last week, and where you see, the horizon over the next couple days / couple weeks?
I agree with you. I think we've weathered the storm, so to speak. We definitely are seeing a decline in new diagnosed cases. At our peak, we were managing some numbers anywhere from 1 to 1.5% of all the cases in the world were being managed here at Northwell as the largest healthcare system in New York State. In New York City, we're managing about 25% of the cases. We've definitely seen a decline, which we're very happy about. But now the next phase is what we're anticipating, and when will that next phase be, and how do we prepare ourselves for the next phase? And that's going to depend on a lot of factors, and Dr. Boockvar has his own predictions of when that's going to happen. He has some clear dates that he has told us about, but no one knows for sure, but we're bracing ourselves for that.
So how do you tell Americans and New York City people in particular who are starting to come out of, they've been quarantined and they have basic medical problems. Are our emergency rooms ready for the onslaught of regular problems, whether it's orthopedic injuries, heart attacks, strokes? How are you dealing with the division of COVID positive patients in your emergency room and the regular patients that are coming through and will be coming through May, June, and July?
Thanks a lot. I'm appreciative of that question because it gives me an opportunity to really address something that's really important. We've seen about a 25% decrease in chest pain patients coming in. These are patients who are having heart attacks. We've seen a decrease of almost 40% of patients with stroke-like symptoms. This is very, very concerning. I think the message has been to all people to stay out of the emergency departments. Well, that's not a healthy message. What I like to let people know is that before SARS, there were other infectious diseases such as TB, the flu, C. diff. You could go on. And we've always done a great job to protect the public from other infectious diseases when they come into an ER. Now, I understand the anxiety around COVID, but nothing has changed. As a matter of fact, we're even more vigilant right now to assure that anyone who comes in here for a different condition besides COVID will be separated, will be protected, and they're not at risk of contracting COVID in this environment.
So you're saying if you have chest pain or you have numbness or weakness on one side of your body, you want to be seen in the emergency room to rule out whether you're having a heart attack or a stroke or something like that.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there are reports that are coming out throughout the nation that are very scary, that folks have been sitting on their chest pain, they've been sitting on different conditions and coming to emergency departments and worse off than they would have been had we intervened sooner. So this is a public message. I hope that it comes from high above, from our officials, not to get political, but we need to start messaging this very clearly, that it is safe to come to emergency departments and is actually to your benefit to come early with your symptoms versus later.
And I know this is a question that you've probably been asked, but as far as personal protection equipment and the healthcare workers in your work staff, are they comfortable? How is their mentality? Are they weakening because they've been fighting for 4 weeks? Or are they gaining momentum because they see the clouds parting? Or are they comfortable now in their PPE? What's the morale like?
I think the morale has shifted. I think that people have seen that we've been successful. We've saved a lot of lives. I wish the headlines were more of lives saved. For example, Northwell has treated and discharged over 6,000 people who've survived COVID successfully. And that's the positive message that we're seeing, and that's the positive message that we're reinforcing day in and day out. In terms of the PPE, you got to get a little used to it at the beginning, but I think everyone is now very comfortable. And I think moving forward, we may require, so if you ask some of the good things that have come out of COVID, we may require that all patients wear masks and all providers will be wearing masks at all times during all interactions.
And could you just...
Johnny,
yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I heard today from Elmhurst Hospital, or it was Jamaica Hospital, that the USS Comfort is leaving New York. Is that true? Do you expect patients will be returned to places like Jamaica and Elmhurst?
Absolutely. So as of today, for example, at Lenox, we took back 5 of our patients that had originally gone to the Comfort. I'm not sure about the Javits yet, but Comfort is definitely shutting down operations.
And just to echo what Dr. Duroseau said, that becomes a big problem if those patients are ventilatory dependent, because, as you know, one of the biggest risks of this whole pandemic is meeting the demands at the healthcare level and managing that healthcare surge. And we just stayed at the healthcare capacity line, and if we're now having to reabsorb some of that overflow population, that's going to be challenging, particularly if we see an uptick as quarantine is lifted. So the USS Comfort is sailing home, and my understanding is the Javits Center is not far behind as far as closing. One of the issues that we did see, Danny, just to address the whys, is there was not great staffing, frankly, at the USS Comfort, and so they couldn't handle the volume of ventilatory patients that we needed to decant at our hospitals. For example, I heard, and I wasn't there, and this is somewhat hearsay and innuendo, that there were, one or two intensivists that came along when you needed basically 5 or 6 to manage the ventilatory capacity. So we're going to just absorb that population and hope for the best. And like Dr. Duroseau said, we've gotten better at treating this disease over the last month. We're discharging a ton of patients. And so that throughput is going to help us absorb some of this new capacity. But obviously, we're going to have to watch that very closely, particularly if we're dealing with another surge.
I have a question to that. Speaking of the surge, there's obviously a lot of speculation that come fall, you're going to get that surge again. And I'm assuming from a hospital standpoint, you're learning a lot of lessons now to better be able to handle that potential surge in the fall.
Absolutely. So a lot of the changes that we've made now, we're not going to stand them down just as yet, because we do anticipate it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when that we will get a resurgence. The scenario we're most concerned about is that the spike in flu and COVID will coalesce and create a huge spike of viral-like illnesses that we typically see in the fall. So I think a lot of public health messaging is going to have to go out, especially for the flu. This is not a time to be an anti-vaccinator. Maybe we'll see an uptick in people who actually go ahead and do take the flu shot. Because you don't want to come to the hospital, first of all, with a flu-like, a viral-like illness. You want to protect yourself and your loved ones. And you also don't want to have co-infectivity, meaning you have both the flu and COVID. It can make things a lot more complicated for you.
Well, Dr. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure working in the trench with you, and I think we're going to be in that trench for a bit longer. So thank you very much, and we look forward to having you on again. Thanks for
joining us.
Thank you. I will hang out with you guys. I will meet. Thank you.
Take care, Yves. So I'll introduce our next guest, which is Michael Levine. Welcome. Michael is the co-head of CAA Sports, which is the #1, or fast became in the last 10 years, the #1 sports agency in the world. I think you represent over 1,000 athletes, Michael, and an old friend, so welcome. And we're very happy to have you here to share your perspective on not only sports, but your unique view of sports, pop culture, hospitality, and entertainment, given your vantage point. So welcome. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here with you guys. Let me just start by saying it feels a little frivolous to chat about sports and what I do compared to what Dr. Boockvar and Dr. Duroseau are doing with their teams every day. So frankly, I'm glad I had a chance to listen to that. It's humbling and incredible, the sacrifices that the teams are making for the city and for the country. And I just send my admiration and great respect to all of you and the people that are working for you and with you out there every day.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. Mike, every aspect of sport has been affected by the virus, from the athletes themselves to the media coverage, all levels of income, broadcasting, corporate sponsorship, every, same game day revenue, everything's been affected. How has it affected CAA and your overall, day-to-day, week-to-week?
So, we are a pretty broad-based company in all aspects of the sports and entertainment landscape. But because of that, we've been hit by the lack of live events. I think if I were to simply sort of speak to the challenges that our business faces, that would be associated with anything that involves an audience. So that, starts with live concerts and tours. We are the booking agents for 65,000 concerts a year. And I think the estimate that I've heard is that we'll probably have 15,000 this year if the virus sort of continues to proceed the way we are anticipating, which is that there won't be any live concerts in arenas or stadiums around the world until at least 2021. That holds true for the basketball and hockey seasons, the baseball season, all of which are meaningful to us. Hopefully there'll be some ways that we can figure out how to have a bridge events without fans for the sports world. But when it comes to theater, there's really not an alternative. I think that live concerts, we've seen a lot in the last couple of weeks from people's living rooms or bedrooms. I think that the artists are doing their best to try and entertain us and give us some content. But I think that we've all seen enough of Elton John struggling through and I'm Still Standing. And I think that we're going to have a real hard road ahead in the music and the theater and live entertainment business. Our company also is in the film and television business. There haven't been any productions that have been taking place. Obviously, no one's going to movie theaters. That'll have ramifications for our business down the line. But we're fighting through it and doing everything we can to kind of get as much out of the parts of our company that aren't impacted by the virus as we can. Because there is still business being done. There's still sponsorships being sold. There's still advisory work being done for brands who are out in need of reaching consumers in creative ways. There's still media rights discussions that are happening. And actually, there are even stadiums and arenas that are being built by our teams. We have about 32 teams in different parts of the world building stadiums and arenas, which is a little shocking, frankly, but it is happening.
Mike, it's Peter. Great to see
Pete.
you. So it seems that the NFL draft last night was a big success in terms of the viewership and just everyone hungry to watch this stuff again. Does that give you confidence that if we get to the fall and you have to play games without fans, that certainly from a TV standpoint, there's going to be huge demand? And does that give you more encouragement that somehow the leagues can figure out how to fill the teams and the coaches and the film crews and everybody that it takes to actually pull off the production of a game?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, between last Sunday's Michael Jordan doc, The Last Dance, and then the number, which came in around 6.3 million viewers on ESPN. It was a huge event compared to anything they've had since 2004. Last night, the overnight ratings came in over 11.5 million. Again, a huge audience. So there's clearly been pent up demand. I think sports, the nice thing about where we all are, both as consumers and fans of sports, and then team owners, leagues, athletes, everyone's aligned in that something's better than nothing. And the ecosystem will get a huge shot in the arm positive if we can have events, even if fans aren't able to be in the arenas or the stadia, because so much of the ecosystem is fed by the media rights revenue. And that's an advantage that sports has. So I know that the commissioners are working with the various players associations to figure out scenarios where those steps can be taken. And I'm fairly optimistic that that something is possible. It'll just be a question of what and when and where. So I think it is a positive.
Do you guys represent Novak Djokovic?
Not anymore. We took him from his childhood to number one, and then he fired us for greener pastures.
And I think he's an anti-vaccinator, right?
Yeah, I was reading about that. He's an interesting cat, and he's had a lot of family challenges that we've lived through, but heck of a player. Kind of reminds me of a young Peter Boockvar with that oversized Prince racket. Him and Robbie Rothbaum taking that first court together.
Yeah, that was the good old days.
So,
Mike, just one more follow-up question to that. So in terms of prepping a stadium for fans again, like I've been saying that the thermometer could be like the new metal detector, that it just becomes a standard thing that a fan is going to have to get used to. Are there other like cleanliness things that you guys are beginning to think about on how to bring these fans back into a stadium?
Yeah, I mean, I think beginning to think about is the answer. I think I would defer to the doctors to kind of have the answer to what that's going to be. But clearly, there are going to be new protocols across all walks of our lives, and whether that's an office building, whether it's a theater, a stadium, an arena, it's not going to be like it was 3 months ago. And I think that we're in the earliest stages. We have a part of our business called CA Icon, which is building and sort of super GCing, project managing the stadiums and arenas for all the team owners across the world. And we've just begun early stages of some advisory work to kind of help them think through how they're going to need to try and rethink the way they present at a game day. But we're a long way from having those answers. And I think so much of it is going to be a function of the science and medicine.
Yeah, let me just comment on that a little bit. I think it's important to recognize where we are with testing. And I think apropos to Mike's point, we're not going to have the ability to put anybody in a stadium anytime soon without good epidemiological testing of both exposure and convalescence or recovery. So our antibody testing, which measures recovery, Pete, is rolling out. For example, Northwell Health is rolling out wide-scale antibody testing by Monday, where we expect to do 10,000 tests per day. Well, they'll be able to measure by venipuncture, by my vein, whether I have evidence of antibodies, which means that I had exposure. You know, New York State just looked at 3,000 of New York State and found that 21% of New York City tested were positive for antibodies. So that's actually very good news. It's a much larger number than we had anticipated, which means that many people have been exposed and convalesced or recovered. Now, whether we can fill those stadiums before a vaccine is really the magic question. And Michael, you tell me, can an owner survive if we tell them they can have a sporting event at 30% capacity of an NBA game, or even a fanless season, or whether you do Major League Baseball in Arizona shortened? You know, not every sport is the same too. And what happens in the locker rooms or high touching sports where, you know, the NBA was one of the first sports that had positive COVID players, and a touchy-feely game like basketball where you're literally touching the ball and passing it, basically passing the virus at practice from person to person. And if you're a 65-year-old male coach, for example, you're in the high-risk category. So there's going to be, you know, I think if we are gradually opening up society, a packed stadium is going to be one of the last things that comes back online. And frankly, Mike, I don't know how the owners and you and your players are. You're going to have some understanding of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a belief that is shared widely by many. And I think you're right. I think that there's an approach that is being centered around playing games for television distribution rather than for live fans. I had a call this morning with the head of our theater department, who was involved, you know, with the governor about, you know, reopening Broadway theaters, and someone was suggesting that they space seats and that they do it every other row. And, you know, he said there's just no way that Broadway can function. The economics don't work. I would say in sports, there's plenty of fluff in there in the system. And there's tons of room for contraction. So owners would take tremendous hits, and their P&Ls would be a lot different if we had no fans for a number of years. But there's still a lot of demand, as we saw last night, and I think we'll see in the months ahead, if we do get games without fans, that will support a fairly fertile sports ecosystem. But what happens is that when the entire peak, you know, you understand this probably better than I do, when the revenue sources cease, that impacts everyone in the ecosystem. So while the NFL's salary cap may not shrink or contract for a year or two, if we don't have fans, we're going to see that trickle down through the player system, and obviously that'll impact agencies like ours.
Michael, any of your clients, any shout outs to any ones who have really helped their communities in an inspiring way that you could share?
You know, so many of them are doing so many different things, big and small. Sort of industry-wide, we've seen a pretty incredible response to Michael Rubin's All In Challenge. Not sure if you guys have been catching that over social media. We've been working pretty closely with him to try and spark what will hopefully be a viral scenario where the owners, commissioners, players, and other celebrities are donating items that will be either auctioned off or bid upon as part of a raffle by the masses in order to raise money, really with a focus on feeding kids and those that are in need. They've got 5 sort of world-class charities in this country that are the benefactors, and their goal is to raise $250 million, which is pretty ambitious. Wow. But they're on their way. I think they've got 25 million in, and they really haven't begun to get mass involvement. So pretty inspiring to see the way there's a fairly universal interest in trying to help somehow. I think the hardest thing is for people to figure out where to channel their energy, and our client base is doing a lot, both on a sort of visible and sort of very low-key capacity. We have a foundation within our agency. It's 12 full-time executives that are sort of a nonprofit agency within our agency, and they serve both NGOs and the communities that we have offices in and our employees, but also act as a sort of conduit to our clients to help them apply their interest in trying to get involved. And so they're as busy now as they've ever been. And that's been true in a variety of crises over the years.
Michael, I just want to say that I think it was the draft last night that I was watching with our family, and Anthony Fauci came on with a public service announcement. And to me, I can't appreciate, and I want you to know this, that how much we appreciate sports may seem trivial to you when you started, but it is such an important morale injection for our whole environment. And to have Anthony Fauci come in and use it as a mechanism to really distribute what Dr. Duroseau was saying, which is basically public service messages, is just as important. And you know, our emotional well-being in this time is extremely important also. And what is going undocumented is the wellness of people that are in their basements, or the elderly population that are not seeing their loved ones and their grandkids. And to have even a fanless sporting event will be extremely important to morale. And that was shown in the draft last night and the Bulls documentary. So I encourage you. I'm not going to have much say in this, but I can tell you, you should know that it's going to be very impactful for the well-being of a lot of people.
No, I appreciate it. And frankly, I feel it myself. We were starving for the action last night, and even putting our business aside, we were tuned in as a family for the last dance. And I think that the players are having as much interest in trying to get back out there. I think that, like many people who have sort of gained appreciation for things that they took for granted before all this, they realize how ephemeral their careers are and how much they enjoy doing what they're doing. So I do believe that we'll be out there at some point soon, and we'll have more to occupy our time than we have now. And you know, I was actually really pleased with the way that ESPN and the NFL put the show on last night. I thought they did a really good job incorporating an appropriate level of public service into the draft. And the NFL took a lot of heat early in the quarantine by moving forward with the free agency period and then keeping the draft as it was scheduled. I'm so glad that they plowed through. Commissioner Goodell's attitude has been one that we're going to try and go forward until we can't go forward. And I think that the way Commissioner Silver sort of led the way in shutting down the games back, that night in Oklahoma City. I think he hopes, and we all within the sports industry hope, that we can help bring things back to life slowly and in an appropriate and healthy way.
So Mike, to that, and also to tie in something that John was saying earlier, is that Major League Baseball is going through this antibody testing with 10,000 people, players, coaches, executives, and so on. Do you think that's a precursor, once they get those results, to actually playing games this summer in Arizona?
I sure hope so. For us, we did a reforecast about a month ago of our sports business, and we modeled that the basketball and hockey seasons wouldn't continue, and we thought we were being conservative when we modeled 40% of the baseball games would be played. At this point, that's not such a layup. I will say that of all the four major sports, baseball is, I think, in the worst shape. The combination of the fact that so much of their revenue comes from fans in attendance, both through the ticket sales and through per caps being spent at the ballpark. They have over 4 million fans, coming to Yankee Stadium alone. So you multiply that by all the teams, and then they have a really stressed regional sports network, local TV model, which, has been under pressure for the last few years with cord cutting and the cable bundle coming apart. So that's a double whammy for them. Basketball and hockey get much more of their overall revenues from national television revenue, which is not in jeopardy even if you don't have fans. So it's really a tenuous moment for baseball. I think that they've put their labor strife aside, and they're working, really closely with one another, trying to figure out how do they get games in, because the regional sports network revenue model craters with less than 135 games. There's a non-delivery clause in a lot of those deals that will really make things hard for team owners.
Michael, last question. Do you see the NCAA going in a different direction?
That's a broad question. You mean college sports, college athletics?
We have an attendee who is asking specifically about Notre Dame and whether Notre Dame and the NCAA will go in a different direction.
So, okay. I would say this, that college football is by far the biggest part of the economic puzzle for sports in college. And I've had enough exposure to leaders in the conference level, although Notre Dame isn't part of one of the conferences. They're sort of there on their own, and Jack Swarbrick is part of these conversations. They're not going to have a college football season if there aren't kids at school in September. The university administrators, the conference commissioners, they just don't see how that's possible. I tend to agree with them. So I think that will have profound impact on these universities, on the towns like South Bend, Indiana, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where so much revenue and so many jobs get generated around college football. And then the fallout that comes from that income funds all the other sports at all of the colleges that we are so used to. So as someone who played a non-revenue generating sport that was funded by, football and basketball to a lesser degree, it's a really fragile system that could come crumbling down in the short term.
Super. Thank you so much, Bino. So good to see you again.
Thank you, guys. By the book. It's happening. I love it.
Stay safe.
Thanks for coming on.
I hope Ginger's in the audience.
All right, now we'll go over Shari Boockvar. Founded NutriFacts Inc. in 1994, specializes in nutrition counseling for weight control, heart health, fitness, cooking, kids, and medical management. You've appeared on local and national news stations such as ABC, CBS, Fox, NBC, and now By The Boock. Welcome, Shari. You also happen to be the wife of Peter Boockvar, so we are thrilled to have you. And with that, I'm sure you've been busy helping people to navigate healthy eating during the quarantine. What do you think?
It's been actually very interesting because it hasn't been so much about healthy eating as it has been trying to get food on the table, trying to get deliveries, trying to get to the stores to buy food, and then having food that's comfort. We eat for so many different reasons, whether it's for togetherness or sometimes for stress, for happiness, for so many reasons. But I am going to try my best today to give suggestions. I've had a lot of questions not only about food, but supplements. The answers that I'll give will be general. You should always consult with your physician or registered dietitian if there's any questions in terms of dosing with supplements. Sometimes there's food and drug interactions, so that's something to be careful about if you're starting any new supplement. Everybody has different needs. But one of the things that I wanted to start off with is that this is a new virus. As we all know, there are no studies out there yet in terms of food and supplements and coronavirus. There's a lot of conflicting and different information, not only in terms of food, but also food safety and how to handle it. And the best thing right now, nutrition-wise, is to eat healthfully as best as you can and to exercise to boost your immune system. We hear over and over about proper hygiene, in particular with hand washing. And, I'm all about recommending healthy foods. I'm a little wary about recommending certain supplements right now because many can have side effects. And, my question to friends, family, clients is, do you really want to start something new? What if you have side effects, nausea, vomiting? Now you have that compiled on top of possible symptoms of coronavirus. My feeling is to eat healthfully, enjoy your food, exercise, do as best as you can so we can feel ourselves, I guess is the way to put it. Rather than if you are going to start with anything new or any supplements or foods, always start smaller and then you can always go bigger.
Shari, I'm going to start with one question.
Sure.
Could you just remind the audience what the role of the FDA is in overseeing everything that we buy in a GNC supplement store? Or let me rephrase the question. Does the FDA regulate our vitamins, our supplements, our alternative therapies in any meaningful way?
I don't want to. I'm going to get a quote wrong here. So let me rephrase my answer for you. Is
Okay.
that claims for supplements? You will always notice at the bottom of a bottle or anywhere else that certain claims have not been approved by the FDA, so that it does not fall under the same regulations as food does. I hope that answered your question.
I think from a public service message, and why it's so valuable to hear you say that, is when I have a bottle of elderberry
Right.
on my desk because someone got it for me, I have no idea if there's even elderberry in there because the FDA doesn't regulate that as it does the Tylenol that's in my other drawer.
Correct. The amount, and sometimes brand per brand, it could be a smidgen that's in it. It could be a lot that's in it. You don't know quality wise. So that's an excellent point.
Okay.
I know there's been a lot of talk about zinc also.
Mm-hmm. So
any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Do you want me to talk about elderberry? Only because you happen to have that bottle there.
Sure.
So elderberry typically is used for immune support and can possibly help with cold and flu symptoms. And unfortunately, as I said earlier, there's just not enough data to show potential benefits with coronavirus. But the one thing that I did want to bring up is that in some small studies, elderberry may actually do more harm than good by increasing inflammatory aspects that can actually make coronavirus more complicated. So I actually do not recommend taking elderberry right now for coronavirus. Potentially, again, there's a difference between talking about it for cold and flu. But as far as coronavirus, Johnny, I would not take that right now. I would put that aside.
Too late. No.
Okay.
So I think
you seem to be doing well. Thank God.
Well, I think it brings up one just medical part of the disease, and Dr. Duroseau, you can also chime in. But what Shari is alluding to is something called cytokine storm, where we get this abnormal inflammatory reaction to the virus. So the virus in itself is dangerous, but frankly, it's your body's immune system that is more dangerous to you than the virus itself. And what happens in the lungs is this massive inflammatory cascade that can actually drown you in your own inflammatory system. And so we call that cytokine storm, and anything that Shari says about modulating or evening out that inflammatory system is important. So I will immediately cease taking elderberry. So thank you for saving my life.
Sure. Danny, you asked about zinc, which is another supplement that is commonly taken for a common cold, and it can potentially help reduce in duration as well as symptoms for the common colds. But again, no studies on coronavirus. And actually, at the beginning of this whole coronavirus epidemic, zinc was very hard to find. Now, the one thing that I want to mention about it is that one of the side effects of zinc can be bad taste. Nausea, and it can affect your sense of smell. And as many of us have heard, that the coronavirus can also affect your sense of smell. And I would be cautious, because if you are having that side effect, I know in my mind I would be wondering, is this a side effect of coronavirus or is this a side of zinc? So just keep that in mind if you are not used to taking zinc. Also, if you're going to if you are going to take zinc, just don't take more than the recommended amount. It's one of those things that you just want to do slowly and take carefully, and just be aware of your side effects. But again, no studies have been seen yet with the coronavirus. But it was very interesting to see how it was just as hard to get coldies at the beginning of this as it was to get toilet paper, which I thought was interesting.
I want to come back to that about the sense of taste and smell, but we have a question from the audience about two other items, echinacea and vitamin D.
Okay, so let's start with vitamin D. Vitamin D is one of those that I do potentially recommend. First of all, it can help the immune system and possibly with respiratory health. But the big issue here is that many of us are actually low in vitamin D, necessarily getting outside as much, and our body makes natural vitamin D from being outside in the sun. Different people, different opinions on this, but about 10 to 15 minutes a day. So especially if you are low in vitamin C, if you've had your blood work done, you want to take it, the safe recommendation is about 1,000 to 2,000 IUs a day, but even more if you're deficient. But the 1,000 to 2,000 IUs a day is likely safe. My family and I, we are currently taking 1,000 IUs in addition to a multivitamin. So just giving you my opinion on what I'm doing for my family. And it likely can't hurt, and it might help. So again, these are my general recommendations. You should always check with your physician or registered dietitian just to make sure there's no interaction for your own personal health or medication, but that is something that I think can be potentially helpful.
I can confirm we are taking those vitamins.
And as far as echinacea goes, same thing, colds and flu. It's used for immune health and antiviral, but nothing shown with coronavirus for right now.
So I have a follow-up question, and Yves and Johnny and Shari, how do you counsel someone who's lost their sense of taste plus their sense of smell? As a nutritionist, how do you do that?
Well, this is one of those things that's person. What might help one may help somebody else or not. Some that include the garlic, apple cider vinegar. Very important. But the one big thing here to be careful with your loss of hot foods, because if you don't have that sensation of hot, you can actually have damage to your taste buds, so you want to be careful of that. Sometimes spicy or strong flavored foods tend to enhance your taste, enhance your smell, so you can experiment with that, different flavors. But there are some natural remedies out there.
Danny, I'm going to run with your idea and actually ask Dr. Duroseau also. If we get called quite a bit for people who have lost their sense of taste and smell, is that an indication, Dr. Duroseau, for them to come and get tested for COVID?
We've actually almost found it to be pathognomonic, meaning that when they have that symptom and it's very clear, it's been very highly correlated with COVID.
So if you have no fever no headache, no cough, no shortness of breath, but you wake up and you have no sense of smell and taste, should you go for COVID testing?
Yeah, that's something it would be concerning in this environment, and we've seen it repeatedly, and there are publications on this. In terms of the part where people are not smelling any, so they tend to eat a lot less, drink a lot less, and the thing I emphasize with the patients is you gotta hydrate, because nothing tastes good, they just lose their appetite. But back to your point about the cytokines, and your body is really trying to fight this virus it's never seen. And you get significantly dehydrated, people get very tired. So I really emphasize that part of it.
Shari, we get asked a lot also about whether take an avocado out of the supermarket and how you handle food in a supermarket. It's relevant to, do you take a pizza box from the delivery person at your front door? Can you give us sort of your interpretation of how to handle food, how you handle foods when you go shopping for your all nutritious dinners at night?
Maybe not so nutritious sometimes, but this is probably the number one question that I get. And each week that this comes up, my answer changes slightly more and more. So the way I'm going to answer this today is very different than how I would have answered this question on episode 1 of By the Book. So I will start by saying that COVID does not appear to come from the food that's not transmitted from the food that we eat. Cooking kills it. Digestion does as well. The best practice here is to be washing your hands before you eat, before you, I don't have to repeat everything that we already know. So as far as restaurant, let's start with restaurant food. If you're ordering out from a restaurant, the best thing to do when it comes to your home is, if you can, is to wipe those boxes down, or the packaging down, wash your hands, and then take the food out of the container and then put it on your plate, and just make sure to dispose of the packaging before that, so everything is clean. One of the questions I get within that is, are you eating salads? What about sushi? What about raw food? A few weeks ago, I would have said no, and we were not ordering salads and sushi. But from what I've been reading and doing my research, is that yes, you can, because again, your body kills the virus. So as long as you are washing your hands, washing packaging, throwing it away, you should be fine. If you want to take that extra step and you are concerned, just order cooked foods, and you can always reheat it in your microwave when you get home. So if you don't want to order sushi or salads, you don't have to. I will confirm to say that we did last week, for the first time in weeks, we did order sushi. So that is my feeling in terms of restaurant food. An avocado, as far as any of the produce, when you get it home, you do not want to wash produce in either soapy water or use any kind of disinfectant or sanitizer, because you have more of a chance of getting sick from using the disinfectant than you are from killing the virus. So just put it into colanders. If you happen to have a fruit and vegetable wash, you can use that. If you don't, then just with water, just scrub your vegetables well. You're washing your hands, and just remember that when you're eating those foods, your body's digestive system naturally kills the COVID anyway. Did that answer your question?
It did. And we have another question about red wine.
Oh, okay.
And someone who's been quarantined and drinking a lot of red wine. What are the benefits?
Okay, so this is not a COVID question.
It's someone who just started drinking a lot of red wine during quarantine and wants to know the health benefits.
Okay, so let's just, that's okay. We'll talk about the positives and the negatives of drinking wine. So of all alcohol that's out there, red wine tends to be the healthiest. Why? Because it's a two-pronged alcohol itself, which can keep the blood thin and can be very heart healthy. But red wine in particular has something called resveratrol, and resveratrol, it can be very healthy. It's powerful in terms of cancer prevention and heart disease prevention. So when you drink red wine, you're getting that double whammy of what's healthy for the heart, Now, many of us have heard about the negative effect of alcohol, which is if you drink too much of it, that it can have a negative effect on liver, on certain cancers and things like that. So it's that drinking in moderation, which if you look at the research, typically is one equivalent of 1 drink a day for women, 2 for men, but that also depends on your medical history, how your body type, how tall you are, how much you weigh. But that's a very general recommendation. So if you are going to drink alcohol, the health in terms of heart disease prevention, cancer prevention, I'm not talking about calories or weight loss or anything else, but in terms of overall health, would be the red wine, and with white wine not far behind from red.
Super. Thanks, Shari. I think we're out of questions. Any of Peter, Johnny, Yves, anything before we say goodbye to Shari and wrap up with the questions?
Well, I'm glad we can get sushi again, because I was really craving it last week.
Every week he wanted sushi.
Yeah.
He and my son Austin, they wanted sushi, and I said no. So they're happy that that's back in our rotation.
Good advice, Shari. Thank you. Good.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. There was one quick question about being contagious with the loss of smell and taste. Yes, if you have that loss of smell and taste and it's related to COVID, even without other symptoms, you can still shed the virus and be contagious.
Yves and Johnny, the report yesterday, and you talked briefly about it, about the 21% of New York residents showing positive antibody tests. Does this give you confidence that we're at the beginning of herd immunity from a couple of weeks back? Any other thoughts on the 21% of New York residents showing antibody positive?
I'm going to just say, first of all, there are a lot of unknowns about the testing. They tested 3,000 New York State residents who were leaving their homes and going to big box stores. So they're not essential workers going to work, and they're not in quarantine. There were people from all over the state. Interestingly, there were 21% of New York City's population that was tested did have antibodies. I just want to remind you that, and I was sort of yelling at the TV yesterday when this was going on, because I didn't know what kind of antibody test it was. We still don't know who validated the antibody test. And what that means is, just because you have an antibody, which is called an IgG antibody to coronavirus, doesn't mean it's a neutralizing antibody, meaning that it was made by your body to inactivate the virus. It could have been made to another coronavirus potentially that you've seen in the past. So there's a lot of we don't knows, and I think Dr. Duroseau, I want you to opine on this. It was a very high number for New York City, and we expect a large percentage of New York City to have been infected just from the subway systems alone and the density alone, and 3% of people who were tested from upstate New York were positive. So again, it's an early snapshot. It's only 3,000 people. I don't know if it was a finger stick or a venipuncture. Maybe Dr. Duroseau, you can comment on that.
I agree with you. Specifically about the concept of herd immunity, we need to get to a much higher percentage to say that we're protected and we can go back to baseball games. That's part of where the vaccination is necessary. You need to get above 85% or so in your populations to start to really truly have herd immunity. So, and only a vaccination will help. I don't think that we'll have enough people who are exposed to get to that point, nor do we want that, because the consequences of that are the deaths that we've seen. And especially our elderly people, folks and loved ones, we have to keep them protected. That's not a concept that's going to protect them.
So you don't think Sweden and Stockholm, which they alleged was getting close to herd immunity, you don't think that data is accurate?
Well, look at the consequences also, so right? And it still doesn't, you still want back to the point about elderly population and vulnerable people. You want them back out. You want them to be back in society. That's not going to fix the issue for them, the most vulnerable folks. So again, we need a vaccination, and it may get people back to work, essential workers, and we may have to make decisions. But also, we got to be very careful to elaborate more on what John was saying. We don't know how long that protection is going to last, and we don't know if there are different strains of COVID that are going to start to occur and mutate. For example, the flu I've seen patients with flu A who refuse to get vaccinated. They get flu A, and a month later they come back and they have flu B. So, while they may be milder cases, they had some protection, it doesn't totally inoculate you.
When do you guys see doctor visits, physical therapy, elective surgeries coming back? Actually, I was on the phone with our team in Houston today, and they now have doctor visits and elective surgeries coming back online, but that's not the case here in New York, is it?
Actually, it is. We are in that process of starting that preparation. So for most, even Manhattan hospitals, and keep in mind the Manhattan hospitals will trail some of these other hospitals. We do have a plan in place, like Dr. Duroseau said. We have COVID-free areas. We're just changing the workflow. Every patient's going to have a COVID test within 24 hours of whether you're getting your meniscus done or you're getting brain surgery. And we're all going to be wearing PPE like we've never worn in the operating room like I did today. And our processes are a little bit different, but we have to open up the doctor's offices. We have to do mammography again. We have to do melanoma checks on patients, or else we're going to miss many important life-threatening illnesses. So in my mind, it's important to open up the economy. The most important thing we have to do is open up the healthcare system, and we're going to do that in May. And be prepared to wear a mask throughout it all. But actually, that brings me to a question for Peter, if you don't mind me asking. What was your week like in the markets, and how has the market looked at all of these events over the last week with the stimulus packages and what you're seeing in our numbers that we're reporting from our emergency rooms? Are you factoring that into the economic outlook?
Yeah, the market is beginning to look to the other side. It is seeing that we are, I mean, obviously in Georgia, they're rolling the dice on a reopening, but we're going to learn lessons from them. So the market's seeing that over the next couple of weeks, whether it's medical offices or other things that are going to reopen, they're seeing that sort of the light at the end of the tunnel. They understand they're going to be setbacks. It's going to be in fits and starts. But that's what they're now looking at, and that's why the market's where it is, near 2,800 in the S&P 500 versus where it was at the end of March, closer to 2,000. So it's optimistic that if that's the case and we do reopen, that a lot of the bad economic data we're seeing right now, a lot of the job losses we're seeing will begin to reverse, and a lot of the people that have gotten furloughed or laid off will begin to hopefully get their jobs back. Now, it's going to be a very gradual process, and some of those jobs may not exist again, but the market at least is looking to the brighter side, where the rays of light that you talked about when we first started today.
I heard John Gray of Blackstone describe the recovery as a Nike swoosh.
Yeah, so everyone's been giving out the letters, the V, the U, the W, and that is another sort of metaphor of how this economy could rebound. But I think to that point, it's going to be a gradual process. And I think we just have to be patient and understand that life is not, by the snap of a finger, going to go back to what we're used to. That's going to be more of a 2021 event at some point next year.
Yeah. Do you see it as you also have the bank deposits. Everybody's been saving money. So we have this either pent up demand, or do we have a demand-based recession on top of the job losses? Is that a double whammy, or is that a reason to believe in a V?
I think it's going to be. I mean, this has been a traumatic experience, both at the household level and for companies too. So you're going to have to assume that when the economy is back on its feet again, the consumer is going to be more inclined to save more money and spend less. And maybe they go out for dinner 1 or 2 nights a week instead of 3 nights a week. And companies say, you know what, maybe we can do this function and make this product with less employees, and we need less office space, or we're going to invest less because we need to rebuild our balance sheet. So there is going to be just a natural retrenchment after a traumatic experience. So while that's good longer term as we rebuild our balance sheets, in the short term, that obviously has negative economic consequences.
And I think the last question, and I'll ask it, is one we had asked you 4 weeks ago, which had to do with municipal bonds and the capital situation of state governments. And at that point, you said you weren't so worried, and the overall outlook for municipal bonds wasn't unstable. Has that changed given Mitch McConnell and everything else you're reading?
Well, on the high yield side, I still think people need to be more careful. You need to focus on higher quality bonds, whether it's higher quality munis or high quality corporates. or other high quality bonds. But yeah, Mitch McConnell did bring up obviously an issue. I don't think even congressionally that's something that I think that was more of a political comment than anything. But yeah, when you have a recession, when you have an economic downturn, it exposes bad balance sheets. It exposes bad businesses. And those states that have underfunded pensions and that have a difficulty with collecting enough revenue to pay for their expenses, they're going to have issues here. And that gets to now Congress possibly passing a bill to give money to a lot of the states, but there'll be a whole debate on how to allocate that, who's going to get more, who's going to get less. But yeah, the states are going to be stretched during this time frame, and people buying munis have to be definitely more discriminating and careful with the type of bonds they buy, and they should be focused on more high quality stuff.
Super. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll talk to you again next week. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.